I don't know what the club's going to do without Brian, but that's an aside. Our board host seated at the head table today is Chuck Shattuck, treasurer of the club and member of the Board of Governors. He will ask the first question of our speaker, and it's going to be tough, I think. Following Chuck's question, we will open the program to questions from city club members in the audience. Please note that asking questions from the floor is a special privilege of club membership. If you're a guest and you want to ask a question, it's very simple. Quickly fill out an application form, and then you're eligible to ask a question. And as you know, we always line up behind a microphone that's out there somewhere in the middle of the room. Anybody see it? It's right over in here somewhere. Keep your questions to 30 seconds. And Earl, keep your answers. Well, keep your answers in moderation. Good. Okay. I think a good many of us are aware of the fact that tomorrow is kickoff day for a 3-day National Rail Summit at our Oregon Convention Center. The theme is Railvolution, building successful communities with rail. What better way for the Portland City Club to highlight this summit by having one of the nation's top experts in this field and the founder and chair of this summit that's been going on for 5 years speak to us today. Portland City Commissioner Earl Blumenauer has dedicated his adult life to public service. Although Earl and I have often asked each other the question, when are you going to grow up? Nevertheless, since age 23, he has been a public servant. He was then elected to the Oregon House of Representatives, where he served 3 terms and became the state's youngest chair ever of the Revenue Committee. He authored and led legislation creating Oregon's Transportation Commission. He then served 3 years on a Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. Here, among other things, he experienced the difficulties and opportunities of dealing with the transportation mandates he helped create as a legislator. I think every legislator ought to have to do something like that. Earl is now serving his 3rd term on our Portland City Council, having received 70% of the vote in the last election. He has had the responsibility for the Office of Transportation throughout his terms on the council. Today's subject is hardly new to him. He has spoken at some 200 conferences and workshops over recent years aimed at that subject or around that subject. Earl's subject is specifically, if I can find it here, an interesting one because it starts off with Willamette County. And I said, Earl, didn't you mean Willamette Country? And he said, no, I mean Willamette County. Its future with respect to transportation, looking forward to the year 2040. Earl, it's a privilege to have you here, and it's a privilege for me to turn the podium over to you. Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you very much, Don. And I want to say how much as a City Club member, I appreciate the work that you've done to help build the club. And in fact, as I look out over the audience this afternoon and I see a few of you who are not running for the United States Senate, I did want to share with you something that Don and I have worked out as a special promotion particularly for you. It'll help you, it'll help the club, it'll help the community. Friends ask me, Earl, why are you always running for office? Why don't you get a job? Why don't you work for money instead of asking us for it? Well, actually, I really don't raise that much money, but I'm able to live beyond my means by running for office. Think about it for a moment. Why? Because people think you're always raising money. They avoid you like the plague. You save thousands of dollars in charitable and political contributions, and you avoid strange banquet food. You too can have the benefit of running for office. We have a special City Club kit for a contribution of $1,000 to the City Club. You get a filing fee, a filing form, pays your fee. You get odd little photos that haunt you for the rest of your life. Things that you rejected as high school seniors. You get a voter's pamphlet, an appropriate bumper strip, and you get a lifetime supply of these little envelopes that say, Friends of blank, and we fill that in. And so when anybody comes up to you asking you to contribute to their favorite cause, you say, I was just going to call you because I still have a campaign deficit. You will enrich your family, you will help the City Club, and you will, for years to come, be able to escape these dodges. Now, I ask you, if not for the City Club, and if not for your family, at least consider taking advantage of that offer, because if you're not running for the United States Senate, pretty soon people are going to ask, what do you have to hide? Don has the kits and will accept your contributions. On my desk in my office, there is an odd photo that recently appeared on the front page of the Oregonian. 5 middle-aged guys getting a reality check, watching the Oregon Legislature in special session. It was very instructive about politics in Oregon. To paraphrase Van Bismarck, it was legislative sausage being made, and it wasn't a pretty sight. But what really depressed me was not so much the outcome of that legislation, because I guess I felt deep down in my heart that it would always pass, but it was the attack on the very core of the Oregon message, what sets us apart and makes us special. We heard in a very organized and aggressive way that sprawl was not that bad, that rail somehow was a failed 19th century technology, that the automobile must be given free rein, and that ultimately we would follow the path of other communities around the country. And in fact, some of the most skilled technicians of negative politics are now training their sights on that aspect of the Oregon story. In light of this assault, I think it is appropriate for us to step back and ask, where in fact do we stand today? I think the easiest way is for us to assess what would this region look like if we hadn't embarked upon that path over the last 20 years. What if these critics had been right and we had taken their advice? Well, without max and land use planning, we would have eaten away at the Willamette Valley by now. Thousands of acres of farmland would have been chopped up. There would be worse congestion on I-5, more commuting, longer trips. Downtown Portland would have perhaps had the 12,000 extra parking spaces that the business community 25 years ago told us were essential for its survival. There would not be Pioneer Square, but we'd have that 3-layer parking garage back next to Meyer and Frank. We probably wouldn't have taken out that waterfront freeway when we opened the other two freeways in downtown. We would not have waterfront park. The convention center and the Blazer Arena would probably be out in the countryside someplace, clearly in different locations, maybe in different states. And it's clear that it wouldn't be private investment that would be paying for the new Blazer Arena, but we would be like probably every other community in the country, bidding public dollars to try and hold on to a franchise. Traffic congestion and sprawl would be worse. In southeast Portland, we would have built the so-called Mount Hood Freeway from the Markham Bridge to Chuck E. Cheese. 200 businesses would have moved out. Neighborhoods would have been divided. Dozens and dozens of streets would have dead-ended into a 6 or 8 lane freeway. Would we be seeing the Southeast Renaissance along Hawthorne and Division? Absolutely not. We would have dozens of transportation projects lost as we spent Mount Hood Freeway money not just on MAX, but for transportation improvements in Clackamas and Washington counties, and their problems would be worse. We wouldn't have Airport Way. We'd be trying to shoehorn extra lanes into Canyon, Sullivan's Gulch, and along I-5. Portland would look a lot more like Phoenix or Seattle, and there would be approximately 5 million extra miles driven per day in our community, about 20 trips to the moon. Washington County would look a lot more like San Jose, and we'd have one continuous city from Portland to Eugene. What would we call it? Port Sagene, with 3 million people along an I-5, hopelessly clogged and inefficient. There is one traffic problem we wouldn't have had. We wouldn't have had thousands of people coming to our community looking at one city, at one metropolitan area, at a valley that is doing things right. We wouldn't have over 800 people here tomorrow from 87 cities, the United States, Canada, and Australia, coming here to see how we do things right. I've set forth a little placemat that talks about the past, what we've done in the last 8 years since I gave a presentation with the same title. I'm not going to bore you with what's on there. That's fodder for questions or for you to beat up on me later. But suffice it to say that from the Lloyd District to neighborhood improvements, we're proud of what's happened in Portland in the last 8 years. From the large scale, like in the Lloyd District, thank you, Don Frisbee, and some people at Pacificor who helped put that together, to what's happened in the neighborhoods, where we're studying skinnier streets. Now we're working on cheap and skinny, and 10 neighborhood traffic safety projects for schools. I'm also going to resist the temptation to talk at great length about the future. Suffice it to say, some of the things that I believe are in that immediate future are listed there, but I want to touch on a couple of highlights. There is an urban growth boundary that is listed here. It's not just for reference. It is every bit as much a part of our transportation infrastructure as any rail line, as any bridge, as any road. We're going to have to make sure that it stays approximately where it is on that map. We have affordable housing for our families in neighborhoods that people want to live in, with schools that children can walk to safely and that people want their children to attend. That's part of the transportation infrastructure, and we need to keep it that way. And there are some kind of goofy things, some people think. A streetcar that would tie together Northwest Portland, Portland State, perhaps the Health Science University, provide that East Side connector. Back to the future. I don't think that's goofy. I think it's real, I think it's possible, and I think you're going to be pleased with what you see with the studies that we have underway in the next couple years. There is Number 11, South Portland redevelopment. An opportunity for us to reclaim 17 acres that's now sort of got Front Avenue and a bunch of odd things that Steve Dodderer can explain to you what they are, left over from when we took out Harbor Drive, that can be reclaimed for housing and park opportunities. And there's a water taxi here. Mary and George Shaver are doing some exciting planning and talking, and we can take advantage of using that critical right-of-way in our future. I think these are things that are eminently possible for us to achieve. But I think it comes down to what we're going to do in the next 50 months. Those of us who are politicians or are planners are always pushing this off. When I was talking about 2007, really the context was a Region 2020 plan. Well, now we're talking 2040. But ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we can afford to have this drift off to 2040. That future is upon us. People are moving here more rapidly than we anticipate. We can't afford to waste the time. And I would suggest that what we have to do is focus on what we can do in the next 50 months. First and foremost, I think we have to continue a tradition of creative ways of thinking and expressing ourselves in this community. Two examples. One is we need to focus less on the notion of mobility, moving people around, and more on the concept of access, getting people what they need to do. Some of you are involved with LUTRAC, a land use alternative to solving transportation problems in Washington County. Not just paving solutions, but planning and organizing how people live in ways that they can get access. We need to adjust the rhetoric that is employed in areas of land use planning and transportation. I think if there's any failing, that we tend to be too mechanistic and too negative in what we talk about. Our vision in this community, as I look around the room, people and table after table know all too well, we're not talking about restrictions and taking things away from people. But a well-planned and organized community is a way to capture that vision, to give them more positive choices, not sentence them to just vanilla in terms of transportation or in terms of housing, but a whole range of flavors and options. We must fight to be able to have the language that communicates what we're talking about. Because if we talk about sticks and carrots and restrictions and all the negative things that seem to roll from the tongue, we have people waiting to seize on that negative rhetoric and turn it around and use it against us. We're not talking about densifying neighborhoods. Good grief, I don't want to live in a densified neighborhood, neither do you. But what we're talking about is instead, by making family housing available and attracting people back to our communities, we're talking about re-establishing the historic population that we had in Portland's established neighborhoods. Nothing that we're talking about probably remotely approaches the population that used to be in Irvington and in Eastmoreland and in Portland Heights, back when there were 3 or 4 or 5 kids, maybe even 2 parents and a grandparent or an uncle living in these homes. Today, we have more bedrooms than people in Portland. And our plans call for reestablishing that nearly that historic population density. Because as we all know, what people are cranky about is not the people, it's their cars. Because these stately homes that have 3 or 4 or 5 bedrooms and used to have 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 people, now have 1 or 2 or 3 people and have people, I think a couple of you in this room admitted, more cars than people. It's the automobile and our failure to deal with transportation in a balanced way that is threatening the quality of life, not not the people who live in our city. We want to talk about not affordable housing for them somehow, some sinister people. We want to talk about housing in Portland that families can afford, that people who wait on us in our shops, who are teachers, who are our children, can afford to live themselves rather than with us, right? Some of you can relate to that. By employing language that is clearer and that captures what we really want to communicate about what makes our community special, and those, I think, really that articulate what the aspirations are around the country, our job will be much easier. Second, I've already referred to the urban growth boundary. Every inch that that boundary is expanded makes our job of transportation and housing and infrastructure harder. Every inch that it is expanded is land that is lost to development forever. It will be for generations to come. And I would suggest that all of us need to take the mandate that Mike Burton gave to the Metro Council and to local governments, is to step up and show how we can meet our housing objectives within that tighter boundary. I think we can do it. We're seeing tremendous creativity and energy in Washington County, in Beaverton, in Gresham, I would say even in the city of Portland, in Milwaukee, Lake Oswego. We have the tools, we have the energy, we have the wherewithal to meet that mandate without a significant expansion. Third, we need to get on with our rail agenda. That's not just complete the west side. It's not just start south-north. It's not just the streetcar, but it also includes high-speed rail. And on the little map, you see arrows to the north and the south that suggest that we ought to be able to take rail to Seattle and to Eugene. And that is critical to our being able to meet our objectives. Because $500 million doesn't, I just throw these sums around. $500 million spent on upgrading rail between Portland and Eugene will probably buy more airport capacity in SeaTac than spending $2 or $3 billion to add a new runway, even if you could go through the environmental and regulatory and political hoops to do it. That is critical to our being able to tie the Northwest together. We need to address the problems of freight movement. This isn't just something that belongs to people who deal with manufacturing or with trucking industries or rail or happen to work for the Port of Portland. The nation's warehouse now is on our roads, on boxcars, and air freight. As Mike Thorne points out to us, the amount of gross national product invested in inventory has shrunk from 30% to 15% because of just-in-time manufacturing techniques. And if we have our roads congested, our economy is not going to work. And it is everybody's business, and it requires more attention. We need to have policymakers and community opinion leaders literally walking and biking our talk. The same way that we started to get real progress with childcare when we had CEOs that were moms and grandmoms, or even some concerned grandfathers. I think we will have a different approach to the problems of commuting and transportation when more people in positions of responsibility bike and take the bus and walk to work. I am proud of the leadership of our city council. Former Mayor Bud Clark, the biking mayor, the guy who would canoe the city. Mayor Vera Katz, who has successfully navigated the corridors of power as Speaker of the House and Mayor of the City of Portland without a driver's license. Thank you very much. Commissioner Hales, who routinely takes the bus to work. Commissioner Kafori, who walks to work. the City Council that has eliminated parking on the city, what will be the City Hall lawn, and eliminated paid parking for the council itself and its chief staff members. We need to have more people start leading by example in this area. You'll find that it's actually fun to bike to work. How many people do you think were grumbling today about traffic congestion while they were on their way to ride a stationary bike someplace? We can make this stuff work. I note with interest that Peter Kohler, president of Health Science University, doesn't have a reserved parking space. And you know, that man's taken his life in his hands up there given the parking on the hill. Finance. We need to address for a moment issues of finance. But let me just suggest that what's wrong, it's not adequate to just say that we don't have enough money. That's too easy, and it's a misleading answer. It's true that the legislature failed this community and the state during the last 2 sessions to deal meaningfully with providing for the present maintenance needs, to say nothing of future capital for transportation. It's true that we've been living off the past with federal money, thanks to Senator Hatfield and former Congressman Aucoin. We've been in pretty good shape, but those days are coming to an end. We have the cheapest, it's probably the cheapest state in the union for a person to drive a car. They pay 2 bills when they buy the car or make a car payment, and insurance, those fixed costs. And after that, it's virtually free for most people to drive a car. So it's rationally economic, in an economic sense, for them to drive everywhere. We need to adjust our mindset into a new era. I would suggest those of you who are running for the U.S. Senate or President that, with all due respect for what passes for national issues these days, that transportation ought to be near the top of that list. It's important, and unlike a lot of what candidates are talking about today, this is something you can actually do something about. I would suggest that we can have policies that stop favoring one transportation mode over another. We ought to have the same sort of federal match for transportation projects, whether it is rail or bicycle or auto related. We ought to make sure that our employees are treated exactly the same if we want to provide a transportation or a commuting benefit to them. They ought to get exactly the same dollar benefit whether they drive or bike or walk. That's not going to cost the business anything, but it will have a dramatic effect on people's behaviors. It's time to end socialism for the car. One thing that came out of our legislative ordeal was a cry from some of our critics to get serious about congestion pricing. The more you drive, the more you ought to pay. Not really a concept that we're afraid to examine. I note with interest that some of the people that are now talking about that wouldn't let out of committee a bill that would have allowed us to at least study congestion pricing, so maybe that's progress. If we were to charge the same amount of money, but you just pay it based on how much you drive and how much you pollute, that too will have a profound effect. I suggest that we look seriously at tolls on the Columbia River bridges, and that we have a bottle bill for cars. You pay an extra $50 or $100 when you buy a car, and you get it back when it's recycled. That will help us with the end product. These simple steps will overnight, without requiring extra taxes, without requiring more business expense or new fees, will buy us more highway capacity, less pollution, less incentive to drive and to sprawl unnecessarily. Our job in this room is to be an ally to people on the federal level, to the governor, to the Transportation Commission, to our Metro Council, to make sure that we get on with these, because even though they're simple and they can in fact be cost neutral, they will be controversial. And I'll guarantee you that some of the people who were beating us up because we weren't looking at it will now be screaming at us because we are. I'm convinced, however, that we will be successful in this effort, and we will be successful because of our secret weapon, and that is simply the people who are involved with our transportation and land use planning. There are names that you know well, the Glenn Jacksons and Neil Goldschmidts, the Henry Hewitts, John Kitzhaber, Susan Brody, Grace Kruniken, Mark Hatfield, Ray Polani. There are some names that you may not know so well. Ingrid Stevens, Terry Moore, Leon Skiles, Doug Klotz, Greg Goodman, Chuck Armstrong, Dennis Mulvihill, David Zagel, Molly O'Reilly, Rex Burkholder, David Stewart, Rich Brown, Katrina Woodward, Rob Birchfield, Lee Dayfield, Dan Maloney, Jim Mark, Tyler Volm, Karen Frost-Mercy, Steve Awada, David Rasmussen, Steve Fossler. I could literally take the rest of the afternoon going through a list of over 500 people that I can think of who have made a difference here. That's why we were successful in Salem more than anything else, is because of this momentum, this base that the public and the best transportation infrastructure of public employees, consultants, volunteers, you name it, we've got it, and that's what made the difference. I would suggest that the last item on that map on the back that talks about our milestones of citizen involvement are worthy of your attention, because every bit as important as what we're doing with rail or the urban growth boundary or the downtown parking lid is the cooperative efforts that we've had to make sure that we're building that base, that civic infrastructure. We've got citizen involvement you can't believe. We run classes at Portland State so that our critics will be better informed to beat up on us. We've done that for 7 semesters, and it's the best dollar we've ever invested from the city of Portland, I think. Well, let me just ask the question rhetorically, well, what difference is all this going to make really? Imagine with me that it is 2007 and that we have completed those steps on the map that we know are within our power. What difference does it make for those of us in this room? Well, if we had, about 20% of you would have either arrived here today on foot or bicycle. There would probably be 4 or 5 of you who made the 23-minute trip from downtown Lake Oswego to downtown Portland on water, drinking a latte and reading a paper on the way. 4 of you are looking nervously at your watch, hoping that I will end on time, because you have a 3:30 meeting in Seattle and you haven't started preparing for it yet. But no problem, because you'll walk out here to Fairless Square, you'll catch rail to Union Station, you'll get the 137 train to Seattle, and you'll sit back in a compartment and you'll plan your meeting on the way with access to fax, phone, and a place to plug in your computer. Dozens of you who work in West Portland or the Central East Side will have come on a streetcar, and nobody, Don, will have driven from the Lloyd District, because we'll have expanded Fairless Square and you have 5-minute service. We've invested 20 years in this vision, and it's kind of like the marathon. You've done the 20 miles and you only got 6 miles and 385 yards to go. And you know how far that is, but your head and your heart is telling you you've hit the wall. Well, I don't think we've hit the wall here, but it is going to be a little more difficult in the months ahead. We've done all the easy stuff. Now we've got to make sure that we follow through. I'd suggest that we can, in fact, do that, bearing in mind two items. One is that we are not going to be controlled by the automobile. We're going to manage it as one important, essential part of our transportation system. And that we're not going to give in to sprawl. We're going to hold the line and change smarter. We'll ask the hard questions, we'll take risks, and we will win because of what you have done to get us to this point today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Earl. Getting back a little to the near future and the light rail system, 20th century and 21st century. An integral part of this is the original plan was Vancouver, which we have met an obstacle at this point. What is your feeling at this point on what is happening as far as in the near future, as far as further negotiations, further voting that may come, and what are the alternatives if we do not bring this important economic being into this community?
Thank you, Chuck. That question makes me think of the Dawn Patrol at the Y 15 years ago, right, John? This man's a killer. I was very disappointed in the election across the river, but remember, we lost our first vote when we were trying to finance the expansion of MAX with a statewide registration fee, and frankly, if we would have had an election before MAX opened, I don't think we would have been successful here. I think it takes time for this to grow and to be nurtured in Clark County, and I'm hopeful that what we're doing here with the citizen infrastructure will help there. The far-sighted leadership of a number of elected officials and community leaders in Clark County has continued the minimal study that's necessary to be a part of the project. We're committed to taking that project up to the middle of the Columbia River, maybe across, and then they can pay to get on. I'm absolutely convinced when people look at the expense that's going to be necessary to add capacity or rebuild the interstate bridge, and when people see what happens here as we continue with the rail agenda, I'm optimistic that we will be able to have a cooperative effort that will result in rail going truly south-north. And I think that we're already starting to see people looking at their study efforts over there that's positioning that to occur.
Oh, we're so surprised to see you stand up.
I guess I'm Ray Polani, City Club member. Earl, you mentioned the 2040 process, and it's a very important step, of course. And you also mentioned at some point in your speech automobile welfare. Well, we have a state mandate to reduce vehicle mile travel, 10% and then an additional 20%. On the other hand, you look at 2040, and the plan is to add 1,200 miles of pavement, while transit is going to be expanded less than half of what it has already expanded in the last 23 years. How do we expect the future to be different from the present?
Thank you, Ray. I invite everybody in the room to look over our shoulder in local government. At the Metro Council level, what happens at JPAC, what happens with proposals that come forward for funding, to look and make sure that we are achieving the appropriate balance in transportation modes. I'm confident that we have made a significant shift in this community. I'm convinced that that is reflecting where the public is. I don't think what we have advanced is perfect, but I think it is a remarkable improvement over where we've been, and we're not done. And if any of you look at specifics that you feel in the city of Portland or Gresham or Milwaukee or Beaverton that are missing the mark, we want you to hold us accountable. If you think that there's something that isn't meeting our 2040 standards, step forward and be heard. Because that's the beauty of this system, is that this 2040 program has moved as far as it has because that's what the public insisted upon, not most of the special interests, most of the politicians. And so if we all do our part, I'm convinced that it'll be a 2040 that will work and that we'll be proud of.
I'm Jeremy Grand, a City Club member. You haven't mentioned the subject which is most dear to my heart, which is pedestrian infrastructure. We have a lot of money going to trains, buses, and yet our children still walk to school in the mud and are often driven to school because the ability to walk safely to school is not there. According to the city's Department of Transportation, we have a $100 million unmet need for sidewalks on arterial streets in the city of Portland only. Capital budget was $7 million last year. How are we going to solve this problem?
It is a bear. Some of the areas that we have that don't have sidewalks are going to be incredibly expensive because of topography and because of some past mistakes. It is, I think, a very high priority for the city of Portland, and we've tried to demonstrate that when the city has been cutting back, I think, unfortunately, on the transportation budget. The budgets that I have proposed to the City Council have in fact increased pedestrian and cycling investments, and those continue to be high priorities for us in terms of the capital budget. Part of it is that we are being rather ruthless in terms of new development, making sure that pedestrian access is a part of it, that streets are connected. I have proposed to the school district that there be some money from the new bond proposal, if it's enacted, that we might be able to have some safety improvements around schools that might be a joint project of the city, of the Parks Bureau, of Transportation, and of the school district, of TriMet. And I think we can show what that can happen. For example, on 33rd Avenue, where we both protested because of unsafe conditions next to Grant Park. It is difficult. I think we're making progress. I think you're going to like, I hope you like the pedestrian master planning that we're doing. Is it enough? No. But I think we've made clear our commitment, and it's why I want to get real about the whole transportation finance to make sure that we treat people who drive and walk equitably.
Casey Cowan, City Club member. First of all, thank you for those speed bumps on my streets. Made a big difference. If I can just keep the people from driving up on my parking strip.
For only $100, you can have your name put on the speed bump. It's a new fundraising effort.
If I'd known, we would have had it a lot sooner.
That's right.
I would like you to talk a little bit more about the traffic calming program and what the future holds for it. I have a lot of friends who are covetously looking at my speed bumps. I'm afraid they're going to run off with them in the middle of the night.
Well, we're worried about that. In fact, we just approved a contract yesterday to test a portable bump. You know, when I brought forward a recycling program to the city council, I didn't think that people would be stealing garbage. And there was a time when streets that you couldn't drive over smoothly were things that people complained about. I think we can justly be proud in Portland with what we've done in the area of traffic calming. My staff suggests that I haven't met a speed bump I didn't like. We have moved to change those designs so that they are less problem. They pose less problem for commuters, for emergency vehicles. There are things that we probably should do in terms of public safety with Opticom, automatic signalization for emergency vehicles that automatically change color when an emergency vehicle approaches the intersection, so that we can speed up the flow of essential traffic through increasingly congested roads and have more traffic control devices in other areas to protect emergency access. Part of it is work that we're doing now on arterials, trying to design the streets differently. Again, we're working with the various neighborhoods. Let's see, we had a traffic calming conference here yesterday of national, or I guess international proportions. I think we're on the cutting edge. I hope that you'll... We're doing... Somebody ask a question.
That timing was good, Earl, because we're... You didn't like that question, and we're also at the end of the program. Andy Wheeler, a longtime City Club member, has a question for you, and I'm going to hand it to you. And Andy, come up afterwards, and Earl will be recovered. I can't thank the audience enough for the wonderful turnout, the wonderful questions, and the concern about this particular issue. It shows what a caring organization City Club is, and it's caring about the right things. Not to make a pun, because I'm incapable of it, but Earl, that was a very moving presentation. We're on the right track, and we're adjourned. Thank you.